Oh, good evening. Welcome back to Sitting Down a Snowy Laneway podcast. Today's episode is about
the SS Waratah, mysterious disappearance. This is the mysterious story of the SS Waratah. Nope, not a Nazi flower, but a twin-screwed steam vessel built in 1908. Up in Glasgow's Clydeside shipyards, the Blue Anchor Line had commissioned the Waratah for the lucrative transport of immigrants going to the Australia to escape the dreary weather. She was one of the fastest and most lavish cruise ships going that way. But anything would have been an improvement after the rat-infested convict ships of the First Fleet, and she was called unsinkable way before the Titanic was. On the 5th of November, Firecracker Night, 1908, the coal-fired ocean-goer left England, bound for Australia, under the command of Captain Josh Ilbery. He was full of experience and water, as humans are 70% water, but he had earned his experience all by himself, because he had been the master on clippers and large steam vessels for over 30 years. But on the 5th of November, please remember, for the first time in his watery career, Captain Ilbery became nervous of the sea. A worrying conversation took place between the captain and chief engineer Herbert Mason, a British court of inquiry would later hear. Mason had warned, "If I were you, Captain, once we reach Australia, I'd get off and get away from this ship as fast as possible. She'll make a big hole in the waves one day." The captain, uncharacteristically, agreed. It was not Engineer Mason's first dire warning. Before leaving England, he had mentioned to another court witness that Lloyd's of London would regret insuring the Waratah. Unmentioned incidents at the shipyard led him to believe very bad luck was aboard. But nothing bad happened on the maiden voyage of the SS Waratah. All 700 or so immigrants reached the sunburnt coast of Australia and disembarked the ocean liner to begin undreary lives of melanoma. As the Waratah bobbed at anchor on the edge of the vast continent, Captain Ilbery remained aboard, seemingly drowning in anxiety. Someone else who was having wet feet was Claude Sawyer, a British engineer who had booked passage back to London on the Waratah. But ugly sleep terrors kept him up all night, in which he was gulping salty seawater as a broken ship pulled him down into a whirlpool of death. When Sawyer appeared at the inquiry, he said he had found it hard to be sensible and ignore the drowning nightmares. But this was when the Waratah was just a steam smudge on Australia's horizon. Once she stood in port, towering menacingly, it was too late for Sawyer to ignore common sense and rip up his expensive ticket. So he joined the ship of the damned, as I like to call it. Outwardly, the journey began well. The Waratah made good time on easy seas under a clear blue sky. But Claude Sawyer sensed something was very wrong. His darkest nightmares visited him in his first-class cabin. In the chilling vision, he once again felt the wrenching drag of the ship spiraling into the cold, salty ocean below. The night terror was enough for Sawyer to abandon his first-class ticket to London and get off the Waratah in Durban, South Africa. He tried to convince his fellow passengers to get off with him. They all declined. Captain Ilbery could relate to Sawyer's prediction, but being a practical man, not easily spooked, simply promised the departing passenger that he would do everything in his power to get the Waratah safely to London. Once on land, Sawyer telegrammed his wife, "I consider Waratah top heavy, have disembarked and will board new vessel. Will bring home milk. The top-heavy concern was one shared by Chief Engineer Mason and Captain Ilberry. For under certain conditions, the ship suffered a stability problem, but nothing a load of cargo, correctly positioned, could not fix. Nevertheless, the captain contacted the Blue Anchor Line and asked to return to dry dock for a critical assessment of stability. But his request was refused, and they ordered the ship to leave Durban as soon as she was ready. But in the captain's view, she wasn't. He delayed for 2 days, while 15 additional tons of coal could be added to the cargo. Perhaps the stability problem lay in the Waratah's tendency to list to starboard. Hopefully the added coal would add balance. Meanwhile, Claude Sawyer was feeling guilty from fleeing the doomed vessel. He frantically contacted the Durban Ports Authority manager. "I hope I am wrong," he said, "but something unfortunate is going to happen to that ship if you allow it to leave." The manager took notes in his diary that would, within weeks, be shipped to England to be exhibited at the Waratah inquiry, but the efforts of Captain Ilberry and his defecting passenger did nothing to prevent the Waratah from departing Durban, South Africa, on the evening of the 26th of July, 1909. The following morning she passed the Clan McIntyre steamer ship, which was also London-bound. Through Morse code, the two ships communicated, ending in the Clan McIntyre wishing "pleasant voyage," and the Waratah replying, "Same to you, goodbye." It was the Waratah's final message. The next scheduled port of call was Cape Town. Initially, when the Waratah failed to arrive on time, the Cape Town Port Authority didn't think anything of it, until other ships which had left Durban after Waratah began to arrive. Both ports of Durban and Cape Town sent out search vessels, to no avail. Soon the entire eastern coast of southern Africa was scoured for the missing ship. No wreckage, no debris, no bodies, no sign of the SS Waratah anywhere. 10 years before, the New Zealand ship Waikato vanished in the same area, only to be found on the remote Indian Ocean island of St. Paul, halfway to Australia. A kind of optimism grew among the family of the missing passengers. Could the Waratah's engines have failed and she might be afloat, steered by strong ocean currents identical to those that had flowed a decade before? And she might even have run aground on the same island. The Australian and British governments donated £20,000 towards the cost of the search expedition conducted by family and friends of the Waratah crew and passengers. Alas, St. Paul's pristine beaches sat silent and undisturbed. But at least the families got a nice holiday out of it. The British government's official inquiry ran for 15 days. It became a sideshow of bizarre testimony from an array of witnesses. Claude Sawyer's bad dreams were given as evidence, but he insisted it was his engineering credentials that influenced his decision to abandon the ship in port. He had been alarmed by his bath water. When the Waratah had rolled one evening, the tub water had slid to a 45-degree angle, remaining in that position for a disturbing period of time, before washing back to the horizontal. In court, it was revealed Sawyer wasn't the only man to desert the ship in Durban. Steward Albert Little hadn't had nightmares, nor was he an engineer, but he had been overcome with a terrible feeling that something very bad was going to happen. Little told the court, "I could not force myself to go back aboard." The proceedings looked back to evidence of shipyard workers who described accidents, injuries, and death that had plagued the building of the Waratah. The court rejected the reports of jinxes and bad luck, and even the theory that the Waratah was top-heavy, and ruled that she was stable and seaworthy and should be found soon. Case closed. Why then was there no wreckage? None of the 16 lifeboats? No call for help? No trace? The court's findings were a waste of time and money. Ever since then, persistent reports suggested that the ship and even a few survivors had been found. In 1911, white, blue-eyed children were discovered living with tribesmen on the Transkei coast. They claimed they had swum away from a sinking British ship, but the 2 Canadians who had found the children couldn't find them again when they later returned. Additional rumours suggested that a Waratah lifeboat had washed up on a Western Australian beach. With torn and faded lettering, it only read Wara. So clearly that was from some other ship called the Wara, and not our Waratah. But we'll never know, as the man who described the finding in a letter to the editor was never home when journalists came a-knocking. Only shy people find cool stuff. 16 years after Waratah's disappearance, in 1925, the Margarita, a Greek cargo steamer, vanished in the same area, never to be seen again. Perhaps the crew were drunk on margaritas, or maybe something more sobering is at play here, for 2 months after the Margarita's disappearance, Lieutenant DJ Roos of the South African Air Force told his superiors that while flying over the Zora River mouth, he had spotted, lying under calm, clear ocean, a single funneled liner, which didn't look like the Margarita, but exactly like the far older Waratah. He drew a detailed map, and next day flew back to the area with 2 colleagues, but storm clouds and strong winds had darkened the ocean, and the rusty wreck was no longer visible. Another 2 months later, Lieutenant Roos died in a car crash. His map, which he kept on him at all time, went missing. Stinks of a cover-up to me. The mouth of the Zora River in the Transkei as a final resting place for the Waratah was rejected by maritime historians. Their calculations, based on the Clan McIntyre sighting, together with the combined speeds of the sea current and the Waratah, showed that she could not have possibly sunk at that spot. Then where is the Waratah? And what happened to her and her passengers? Were they swallowed up by a giant whirlpool, like in the bad dreams of Captain Elberry and Claude Sawyer? Is it laying in a rusty grave, as spotted by Lieutenant DJ Roos on his missing map? And is a handful of survivors living with tribespeople on the African coast? Or was it a giant octopus? Giant octopus. Well, I solved the heck out of this mystery. If you have a mystery you would like me to talk about, leave a comment in the comment box below. Not the comment box above. That is actually a search engine. Thanking you, subscribe and all that. Sitting down a snowy laneway podcast.